And next up we have Manuel. Please give him a round of applause.
Okay, I want to continue with this tribute that Errol started for Howard Zinn, probably one of the greatest historians in the United States, who's affected me personally too. After reading People's History, it really got me interested in history of our country. But also other books, Passionate Declarations, or Declaration of Independence, an original edition, Politics of History, all are very worthwhile reading, very easy to read. And I want to read a little bit from his autobiography called You Can't Be Neutral in a Moving Train. I have tried hard to match my friends in their pessimism about the world. Is it just my friends? But I keep encountering people who, in spite of all the evidence of terrible things happening everywhere, give me hope, especially young people in whom the future rests. I think of my students, not just the woman of Spelman, which is an all-black college, women's college where Zinn worked at, and he was kicked out of it because he was helping the students there go on a nonviolent protest against segregation, who left over 100 years of national disgrace to become part of a civil rights movement. Not just a fellow in Alice Walker's poem, Once, who acted out the spirit of a new generation. It is true, I've always loved the daring ones, like the black young man who tried to crash all barriers, and once wanted to swim at a white beach in Alabama nude. I think also of my students in Boston University, of young people all over the country who anguished about the war in Vietnam, resisted in some way, facing police clubs and arrests. And brave high school students like Mary Beth Tinker and her classmate in Des Moines, Iowa, who insisted on wearing black armbands to protest the war, and when suspended from school, took their case to the Supreme Court and won. Of course, some would say that was the 60s. But even in the 70s and 80s, when there was widespread head shaking over the quote, apathy of the student generation, an impressive number of students continued to act. I think of the determined little group at BU, Boston University. Most of them had never done anything like this, but they were emulating similar groups at 100 schools around the country, who set up a quote, shantytown on campus to represent apartheid in South Africa. The police tore it down, but the students refused to move and were arrested. In South Africa in the summer of 1982, I visited Crossroads, a real shantytown outside of Cape Town, where thousands of blacks occupied places that looked like chicken coops, were jammed together in huge tents, sleeping in shifts, 600 of them sharing one faucet of running water. I was impressed. The young Americans who had not seen that with their own eyes, had only read about it or seen photos, would be so moved to step out of their comfortable lives and act. It went beyond the obviously political issues. Young women were becoming more involved in demanding sexual equality, freedom of choice for abortion, control of their own bodies. Gays and lesbians were speaking out, gradually wearing away the public's long-time prejudices. Beyond those activists, however, there was a much larger population of students who had no contact with any movement, yet deep feeling about injustice. Students kept journals in my courses where they commented on the issues discussed in class and on the books they had read. They were asked to speak personally, to make connections between what they read and their own lives, their own thoughts. This was in the mid-'80s, supposedly a bad time for social consciousness among students. A young woman wrote, after reading Richard Wright's Black Boy, I cried for Mr. Wright. The atrocity that he endured. I cried for all blacks, for the unfair treatment that they have continued to receive because they are black. And I cried for myself because I realize that society has instilled some prejudice in me which I cannot get rid of. A young man. 2 summers ago, I worked at the General Motors plant in Farmington. I learned a great deal in that one summer about when life is too many people. The usual scenario goes something like this. A young kid out of high school is, quote, lucky enough to land a job at GM. Soon he realizes that working at GM sucks. The work sucks. The management sucks. And the union isn't even there half the time. So the youngest think about his future. I hate this place and would love to leave, but I've already got 5 years under my belt. In only 25 years, I can retire with a full pension. And so he decides to stay. Whoosh! And his life is gone. A young woman studying in the School of Communications. I'm a photostating logos at work. Logos for television sets. Sony, the one and only. Toshiba, In Touch with Tomorrow. Panasonic, just slightly ahead of our time. Why am I surrounded by such nothingness that pretends to be something? My major is advertising. How can I work week after week creating nothingness? Today in the library, I spent 3 hours looking through books on Vietnam. I need to know more. More and more, I find myself wondering if I could become a school teacher. Somehow, I will tell people what I have learned. Show them where to find things out. This will be my war. A young man from Dorchester, a working-class neighborhood in Boston, which led the nation in the proportion of men who died in Vietnam, who worked in a library to help pay his tuition. America to me is a society, a culture. America is my home. If someone were to rob that culture from me, then perhaps there would be reasons to resist. I will not die, however, to defend the honor of the government. A young woman in an ROTC program, after seeing a documentary film Hearts and Minds. I thought I was doing pretty well, keeping my cool until I saw the American soldiers shoot the Vietnamese. I lost it. Then there was a soldier dragging a mutilated dead body, and another kicking a live one. I watched a student next to me dab his eyes and felt glad someone else was just as upset. General Westmoreland said, Orientals don't value lives. I was incredulous. And then they showed me the little boy holding the picture of his father. And he was crying and crying and crying. I must admit I started crying. What's worse was that I was wearing my army uniform that day. After the film, I tried to think of what was the worst war. I don't think there is a, quote, worst war. They're all insane. A young man in ROTC, whose father was a Navy flyer, his brother a Navy commander. My entire semester had been a paradox. I go to your class and I see a Vietnam vet named Joe Bangert tell of his experiences in the war. I was enthralled by his talk. By the end of that hour and a half, I hated the Vietnam War as much as he did. The only problem is that 3 hours after the class, I'm marching around in my uniform and feeling great about it. There's something wrong with me. Am I being hypocritical? Somehow I don't know. A young woman. As a white middle-class person, I never felt discriminated against at all. But I'll say this. If anyone tried to make me sit in a different schoolroom, use a different bathroom or anything like that, I would knock them right on the ass. Until hearing the black students in class speak, I never realized how strong blacks really feel. A young woman, a junior in liberal arts. A lot was said in class that my grandparents worked hard and blah, 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 blah. Believe me, people have worked just as hard as other people's grandparents have, and they have nothing at all to show for it. I was once told that 70% of the people on welfare were under the age of 16. If 70% of welfare recipients are children, how do we as a great nation claim to justify budget cuts? Another young woman. But the people are the last ones that need their rights stated on paper. For if they're abused or injusticed by government or authority, they can act on the injustice directly, which is direct action. It is really government or authority and institutions and corporations that need laws and rights to insulate them from the physicality, the directness of the people. I found my students in a supposedly placid 80s fascinated by the movements of the 60s. It was clear that they longed to be part of something more inspiring than taking their scheduled places in the American commercial world. The great popularity of certain readings I assigned told me something about these young people. They were moved by the life story of Malcolm X, by the passionate declamation against the war and Johnny got his gun, by the anarchist feminist spirit of Emma Goldman in her autobiography, Living My Life. She represented to them the best of the revolutionary idea. Not just to change the world, but to change the way you live now.